All right, back with the first edition of a different kind of power rankings, 2024 edition. If you've never seen one of these before, a few years ago I did this every week, but it was just kind of too time consuming to do it every week, so I sort of got into the habit of doing it, just periodically throughout the season. But try and give a quick explanation for what this is you're about to watch. This is an analytics-driven power rankings where I take Pro Football Focus grades for each positional category, apply them into an algorithm I have created that usually, is relatively accurate in terms of how important each positional category is. Everything is ranked into tiers. Whatever tier you ended up in spits out a specific amount of win totals, usually a percentage of a win, or like 2.4 wins, something like that, depending on what positional category it is and how you ranked. And then each team gets a total win. It's an imperfect system because PFF grades are going to be imperfect, and I think sometimes some wonkiness happens, and we'll get into it as we go through each team. I never agree with every single one of these rankings. That's part of what makes, I hope, what makes this kind of content interesting. But yeah, let's get into the list. First, I'm going to put this over my screen. This is what each win total is for where you rank in each tier. I'm not going to put this on the screen for the whole video, so I'm just going to put this at the beginning. If you're confused as to why a specific positional category equates to a certain amount of wins, you can refer back to this chart at the beginning. But yeah, let's get into it. Starting off with the bottom four teams, so again, if you have any questions, hopefully you'll understand this as we go along. You see what their win totals are for each category, and then total at the end. One other thing I have to explain before we can finally start talking about these teams is, since it's so early in the season, I'm not taking kicking into account. I just gave every team a flat 0.42 kicking win total, because that's what kind of the average would be, so that explains why those are all the same. But yeah, the Miami Dolphins are currently 32 on this list. Kind of makes sense. Tier 5 quarterback play, currently Tier 5 wide receiver play, that's the surprising thing, right? I mean, obviously you expect the Miami Dolphins to kind of have a lower score because of the quarterback play, and they're not getting a ton else. Tier 5 coverage as well. Those are the three ways you can really make some win totals, is with receiving play, quarterback play, and coverage. But PFF has given positive grades to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, just not dominant ones. And without the depth, that's what's kept them in Tier 5. I think you expect it to be better than Tier 5 throughout the rest of the season, but quarterback play is going to be tough until Tua gets healthy. So that's kind of what that's really what explains that. Jalen Ramsey and Kendall Fuller have both done well, but other than that, not a lot of great coverage stuff there. The Titans do have a decent coverage unit, at least. Offensive line's not giving them a lot. The receiving core hasn't given them a lot. Will Levis, Tier 5 quarterback play. Again, you're going to see a lot of, on the bottom section, bad quarterback play, coverage, or wide receivers, or sometimes multiple of those. Because of that, just 3.74 projected wins for the Titans. The Patriots, another team that covers decently well, not dominant there, but to have some value there. And this is the first team on the list to have at least some win totals in each of the quarterback, receiver, and coverage, aspects. But they still have Tier 4 quarterback play, Tier 4 wide receiver play, Tier 5 offensive line, Tier 5 running game right now. Although Ramondre Stevenson's shown some flashes, but hasn't been good enough to get it out of Tier 5 there. So while they get some points for defense, and that's why they're not the worst in the league, that's also why they're pretty close to the worst because of how poor their offense has been. And then the Panthers, who, hey, out of Tier 5 quarterback play with Andy Dalton's 2 good performances. Offensive line's been great. One of the best offensive lines in football. That's Tier 2 offensive line. But defense hasn't really done much. A little bit of coverage here, but not great receivers. No pass rush, according to PFF. So that's kind of why they're still in the bottom section. Next four, we get our first maybe surprise in this section. First, the Bears, which I don't think is a shocker. Tier 5 quarterback play right now. Receiving has been disappointing to start the year. It just has been. I think you were expecting this to be a potential elite receiving core. hasn't really been that to start this season, but part of what's keeping them a little bit better, there is a jump between 29 and 28. They're looking at over 6 projected wins, and it's because of the coverage, which has given them over half of that by itself. If Caleb Williams can step it up, the receiving core can step it up a little bit, there is potential for this to even be a playoff team. You've stayed afloat at 2-2, but those are the 2 categories that have to improve if they're going to make a deep run. The Jaguars are next up with, again, they're an interesting team in that they only have one category, despite being this low, only one category where they get absolutely nothing, and that's pass rush, which has, the most, that's an okay position to have 0 wins, and pass rush doesn't get you that much, which is, again, a whole other debate for another day. But despite the tier 5 pass rush, kind of Josh Hines-Allen doing a lot of the pass rush work there, they don't have a category that they've been great at, really. Again, not the worst coverage in the world. They've been kind of inconsistent there. Run defense is probably their best category. Well, that's not true. They have a tier 1 running game, but that doesn't even give you a full win just because it's not the most valuable positional category. Receiving play tier 4, quarterback play tier 4. That's kind of why they're here. The Cowboys are probably, that's the team I said that's maybe the one surprise as, it hasn't been a great start, especially defensively. A tier 4 coverage unit, tier 5 run defense, pass rush has been tier 3. You get a little bit of value there, but still, usually you're tier 1 if you're Dallas. So that's been a slump. They're definitely a team that is hurt by the fact that I'm evening out all the kickers for this first episode of this. But quarterback play's been fine. Prescott hasn't been dominant. He's been all right. Same thing with the receiving core. It's been all right. But those 2 things are probably the easiest way to improve, and then hopefully the defense can at least get to okay, especially once Deron Bland gets back, which will happen before too long, but not in the immediate future. And then the Cleveland Browns, who actually PFF says that, hey, it's not all on the quarterback. They have Deshaun Watson as a tier 3 quarterback grade, but a tier 5 offensive line, wide receiver room, and running game, and I still think Watson could play better on top of this. It's a rough offense. The defense also hasn't been as dominant. The front 7 has. I mean, the pass rush is tier 1. The run defense is tier 1. The coverage, tier 4. And that's just an issue right now. So coverage has to step it up, and then the entire offense has to step it up. So that's why they're here. Next 4, we have the Rams, who don't just have a tier 5 offensive line, they have the worst graded offensive line in the league right now. Stafford's been a bit up and down. Part of it is he kind of has to take some chances due to carrying the load a lot. But the receiving room's actually still been good despite the injuries. Tier 2 receiving room. The issue is you're getting tier 5 coverage play. And so when you have tier 5 coverage play, you really need a lot else to make up for it. And they don't have a lot else. They have some else, and that's why they're 6.51. That's why they're at least outside of the bottom 8, but why they still a bottom 10 team according to the algorithm. The Denver Broncos are next on this list. They have tier 5 quarterback play, wide receiver play, and running game. Or it might be tier 4 running game. Tier 4 and 5 running game both get you 0 wins. So either way, some offensive line, good stuff here, at least solid stuff. But that's kind of all they have going for them. Again, amazing coverage. That's kind of what's keeping them in this tier 1 coverage. You get a lot of wins for that, but the offense needs to pick it up if they're going to climb into rankings. The Chargers are next on the list, who, weirdly, the quarterback play hasn't been a strength. Usually, they're all quarterback play and nothing else. Their defense has been kind of what's been great to start the season. I think, again, if you're a Chargers fan, you hope this defense can continue and an offense can get back to at least close to what it's been when Herbert's been healthy. Of course, he's now banged up again. Guy gets hurt. It is what it is. But yeah, Chargers are an interesting team there. Offensive line being graded tier 5 is definitely a disappointment if you're a Chargers fan. Eagles are next up on this list, tied for 20th, so they're technically not 21st. So the team I have ahead of them, it just happened to be the team I put in the chart above, but they're the same. They got the same win total, projected win total of 7.82. Bit of a surprise for the Eagles, but kind of an understandable one. So tier 4 quarterback play for Jalen Hurts. They do have tier 1 offensive line, but tier 4 quarterback play and tier 3 receiving core. I think a big part of this is the injuries they've had to their receiving core. Listen, at the end of the day, yes, it is disappointing that Jalen Hurts, you see his kind of play really jump off a cliff once he doesn't have A.J. Brown. The bright spot is, though, they should have A.J. Brown again. So, well, this is what their current win total is. Keep in mind, it's not projecting forward. It's simply just saying, if you continue to play this way for the whole season, this is where you will be at, which I agree. They'd probably be an 8-win team if this is how they play for the whole season. I think there is hope that they can get better. Still some defensive issues as well, though. So how much better remains to be seen. Quite possibly the biggest surprise is here on the next chunk right off the bat. The Buffalo Bills tied for 20th, despite the fact that many think they could win the Super Bowl. So what the hell happened here? Again, like I said, there's going to be some funkiness with the algorithm, both with using PFF grades, which I think are pretty solid, but I don't always agree with, and certainly in this situation I don't, and maybe some issues with the algorithm as a whole. I think the Bills have both here. So why are they ranked 20th? Well, the first thing that jumps out at you is just tier 3 quarterback play from Josh Allen, which I just don't agree with. I think that's tier 1. So that's 2 wins right there. That bumps you up to nearly a 10-win team right off the bat, which makes you feel a lot better if you're a Bills fan, right? That would put you in the top 12 is where they would be. Or actually, they'd be 13th if that happens. So, you're in the ballpark there if you can at least get that. The other thing, I think, and the big one as well, is their coverage unit gets credit for tier 4, but it's performed, I think, a lot better because their corners have been really good. It's been their safeties and linebackers that PFF has graded atrociously, quite frankly. So I think they're actually doing a better job of pass defense than a typical tier 4 coverage unit would do, even though, I think the grade itself makes sense because of the fact that their linebackers have struggled, especially against Baltimore. So because of that, I'm actually going to say I think the Bills are a much better team. Could still say there's maybe some issues, though. It does highlight the fact that these linebackers and safeties do need to play better if they're going to go on a deep run. The run defense, part of me wonders how much of that was just playing Baltimore, or maybe it really is struggling. I don't know. But yeah, I think the Bills are much better than the 20th best team. This is one where I would say ignore the algorithm and follow your priors is how I would describe it. But that's just my opinion. You're welcome to disagree. This is, I create the algorithm. I have no control of the algorithm once I created it. It just spits out the teams. I'll give my disagreements on some of these teams, and you can disagree with my disagreements or disagree with what I agree with sometimes. That's what makes these things fun. Cardinals, I agree with this placement for them. Kyler's been very good. Tier 2 quarterback play. That feels fair. Defense still just hasn't been good enough. It hasn't been atrocious, especially the run defense has been all right, but it just hasn't been good enough. Disappointing week last week offensively for them, but for the most part, tier 2 wide receiver play, tier 2 quarterback play. You get some solid offensive line play as well. This feels fair. The Washington football team, also known as the Commanders, also known as the Balls, as I put them on this list, which is a running joke Kyle started 4 years ago that I've just kept going with, but they're 18th, and that feels low, I think. It definitely feels low. Does kind of make some sense, though, because they're getting basically nothing defensively, and their defense has been rough. It had a great week last week. Maybe that's something to build off of, but again, it's a small sample size. Through the first 4 weeks, it's struggled. Great wide receiver play so far. That's currently at tier 1 wide receiver play, and currently at tier 2 quarterback play. So, and that's just passing. That's not factoring in Daniels is rushing. So, yeah, usually rushing quarterbacks those teams perform a little bit worse in the rankings. I think it's reasonable to say you could bump them up a little bit. But yeah, that's where the algorithm has them. 17 is the Packers with, I think, an important thing to note. Jordan Love here, the quarterback play, tier 3, that's not horrible. Jordan Love does have a slightly worse PFF grade than Malik Willis does, oddly enough, although they would both be in the tier 3 category, so that's just interesting. But, they haven't really been dominant at anything just yet other than coaching. That is something worth mentioning, is that this algorithm doesn't really take into account coaching. Usually that's a big disparity between certain teams. I think it's fair to say this has been an 8.32 win team to start the season in terms of talent, but then they've been coached to be a little better than that so far. I don't think that's crazy. Offensive line's been very good, but this feels about right for me. Next 4 here, a couple surprises in a positive way. In fact, I think 3 of these teams are surprises in positive ways. How about the New York Football Giants getting all the way up here to 16th? A team that usually has not done well in these power rankings things. In fact, the year they made the playoffs, the power rankings were consistently having them like in the bottom 8 consistently, despite the fact that they won a playoff game. Here, kind of the opposite though. As the Giants have struggled to get wins, the algorithm said, hey, they're not that bad. They've had okay quarterback play, okay wide receiver play, mostly Malik Neighbors being awesome, and doing that alone has kind of gotten them to tier 3. Okay coverage, and again, those are kind of the 3 big categories that puts the Giants to 8.35 projected wins. I don't know how I'm buying into this being an 8-win team, but hey, if the algorithm says it, who am I to question it? Well, I created it, so I can question it, but still feels a bit high, but that's why they're there. And then the Raiders, another, I think, a bit of a surprise team here, a team that, again, I think worth mentioning, has a really good offensive line, tier 1, and in fact, I believe they're the number 1 rated pass blocking. Actually, I believe they're just the number 1 rated offensive line, if I remember correctly, so that's helps out a lot. Tier 3 quarterback play, they've been, PFF has said Minshew's been all right. The wide receiving core has played well, albeit Adams probably not long in Vegas anymore, has requested a trade, so that could change some things. Really good run defense as well, which is what gets them kind of in this tier. Number 14 is the Colts, who are also a surprise, but it's a surprise because I'm just bad at math. I screwed up my counting, which is going to happen on some of these. Feel free to fact check any of these. I show my notes for a reason because I do it all manually and sometimes I screw up. The Colts were not actually this high. Sorry, Colts fans, if I got you excited. They were still all right. You're still looking at over 7 wins right now, which is, I believe that drops you down to around like 23rd, which is unfortunate, a bit of a drop off. But I guess what I would say is that I think they're better than that. So the defense has gotten them some wins, and the offensive line has been tier 1, only getting credit for tier 4 wide receiver play, tier 5 running game, and tier 5 quarterback play. I think all those things you could argue should be higher. Jonathan Taylor, I think, has shown real flashes when he's been out there. I think there's a lot of talent in this receiving core. Tier 5 quarterback play I kind of agree with, but yeah, I think there's some value here. Again, sorry, I don't want to go back and re-record all of this video that I've recorded, so we're just going to go with it. But yeah, apologies there. Again, doing what I can here on the different kind of power rankings. But moving on to 13, you have the Atlanta Falcons, who tier 3 quarterback play, which is maybe, I think you were hoping for tier 2 quarterback play with the Cousins contract, but, still a significant step up from the tier 5 quarterback play that it was last year. Tier 2 wide receiver play, which is good to see. The coverage has been good. So again, we're getting into the good teams right now, of the teams that really do well in those 3 big categories. Still not getting much of a pass rush, but get some run defense. Offensive line could be pass blocking a little better. Does run block well though, so that's why the Falcons are 13. Next chunk, another surprise or 2 in this list. First, the Chiefs being just 12th, which kind of makes sense, honestly. Like, I know they're the Chiefs, so we should assume they're number 1, but, like, again, this is just simply evaluating how they've played, and, like, I think anyone who's watched this can agree, it's weird that they've been so successful, right? I mean, Mahomes hasn't been off to a great start here. The offensive line, they've actually graded pretty well, but they still could use a left tackle, in my opinion. The receiving core has been okay. The middle of the road, although losing Rashee Rice now, he was a big part of why it's been graded okay up until this point. To me, the biggest surprise, though, is the Chiefs' coverage unit only ranking, 2.06. I think a part of this could be the fact that they do rely a lot on these corners, but I think actually the biggest reason why is just kind of similar to Buffalo. It's the safeties and the linebackers not really getting particularly great grades, and those guys are out there a lot. So even though the corners themselves, Jalen Watson, he's ranked 24th, Trent McDuffie, he's ranked 6th best. You also have Chamari Connor, who's ranked 32nd. He's a safety, but he's done all right. But it's more so the other players, kind of the depth pieces, that's brought the average down. You could argue they should be higher. I think that would be a fine argument to be made. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are next up on this list at 11. They have tier 2 quarterback play with Baker Mayfield, who has played really well. The wide receiver play, maybe not as dominant as you might think. Again, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are both very good, but still, what's been kind of an issue for a while for Tampa Bay is the depth past those two guys. Not much of a run game, which has been an issue for forever. Not much of a run defense, which has not been an issue for forever, but really the edge rushers haven't been great, and Vita Vea being injured for a good chunk of this hurts all that. The surprise, though, for Tampa Bay is the Tier 1 coverage unit. I mean, without Antoine Winfield still having a Tier 1 coverage unit, that's not easy to do, but they found a way to make it happen, so that's certainly impressive. Zion McCollum, currently PFF's number 1 graded corner. Who would have thought? Number 10 is the Bengals, another team that people might be surprised is so high on this list, but this could make you feel good if you're a Bengals fan. So why is this happening? Why are they so high? Well, interestingly enough, PFF actually likes this Bengals coverage unit, even though I think the defense has kind of played rough to start this year. I do wonder if this is one of those scenarios where, this could be an issue with the algorithm or with the coverage unit grades to some degree of I think for PFF, Cam Taylor-Britt and Dax Hill have both played well to start this year. They've had, the linebackers, Jermaine Pratt and Logan Wilson, have played well. Even the safeties haven't been a disaster. It's more so to depth, and sometimes it's not necessarily about how good 80% of your coverage unit is. It's about how bad the worst 20% of your coverage unit is. That could be a factor. Joe Burrow has Tier 1 quarterback play. First team with Tier 1 quarterback play on the list here at 10. So it just goes to show how important that is. If you usually, all the Tier 1 quarterbacks are in the top 10. But yeah, that's where the Bengals are. Texans, Tier 2 quarterback play right now, Tier 1 receiving play, and Tier 3 coverage. Pass rush hasn't been great according to PFF, has not gotten them to at least Tier 3, which is what you need to get a win total there. But, some offensive line, maybe not as bad as some people might think, but there are some holes on it as well, which hurts. But that's where the Texans are. Next, for a surprise or two here, I think people will be surprised to see the Jets here. I was a little surprised to see the Jets so high. But again, it's that if you can get, the two most important positional categories are coverage and quarterback. They have Tier 1s in both. So even with some other issues, that's going to go a long way. Aaron Rodgers being Tier 1 is a big benefit, and Tier 3 wide receiver play as well, which is the next most important category. Run defense and pass rush hasn't graded particularly well, and that's a bit of an issue. Offensive line hasn't graded particularly well. That's a bit of an issue. But, if you're good at those important things, the rest of it can follow. This can still be a team. I think, maybe some overreactions to the Denver weird loss there. The Pittsburgh Steelers are number 7 on this list. How about the Steelers? Who would have thought they'd climb up this high on the list? Tier 2 quarterback play from Justin Fields. Who would have thought, right? That's a big benefit. Tier 1 pass rush and run defense. So they're kind of a team that is this high on the list without being dominant in the receiving play or the coverage play, and they still don't even have Tier 1 quarterback play. Only, Tier 3s across the board except for quarterback play, which is Tier 2. But they're so good at some of this other stuff. Even their offensive line's been very good. That's what can get them to 12 projected wins. Again, we'll see how long that holds. The Lions are number 6 despite a quote-unquote slow start to the year. But here's what's crazy about the Lions. Tier 4 quarterback play from Jared Goff right now. PFF has not been impressed with him, and kind of hard to blame them a little bit with how some of these games started with Goff. Of course, Goff then had a perfect game, which factors in. So that's probably where that probably jumped him from Tier 5 to Tier 4 alone. Really good wide receiver play. This defense has really stepped it up with Tier 2 run defense, Tier 1 pass rush, and still Tier 3 coverage, which that's kind of all they need defensively. If Jared Goff can step it up, get back to Tier 2 quarterback play, that's an extra couple of wins. That puts you at 14. That's from being, top 6 to fighting for number 1. So that's where they're at. The Seattle Seahawks, Tier 2 quarterback play from Geno Smith, Tier 2 wide receiver play, Tier 1 coverage. That's going to get you places here. That's why they're 3-1. They had that kind of crazy game against the Detroit Lions. PFF is not a fan of this offensive line. Does like the running game, though. So that's Tier 1. So that helps as well. And good run defense. So a lot of good stuff with this Seattle team so far. Finally, the top 4, a couple of surprises, one big one, 3 NFC teams on the list. That's not a surprise, just an interesting thing to note. The Vikings are number 4 with, Tier 2 offensive line play, just Tier 3 quarterback play. I know Sam Darnold's gotten the MVP buzz and everything. I've watched him play. Tier 3 is fair. He's, had some mistakes that haven't bitten them yet, things like that. But it's still doing a good job at running the offense. Well, apparently tier 3 is all they need because they have a tier 1 wide receiving room as well, so that really helps. They get some value with the running game, and then a tier 1 run defense and a tier 2 coverage unit. Tier 5 pass rush, but they're still generating pressure with the Brian Flores scheme. So, scheme doesn't factor into this, but still, it factors into football games. So you could argue they're even better than their 12.76 projected wins so far. Number 3, the Baltimore Ravens, who, the whole story was what's happened to the Ravens? Why have they gotten off to a slow start? Well, their run game has been so good that their offensive line has a tier 1 grade right now, even though the pass blocking hasn't been great because of how good the run blocking has been. Lamar, tier 1, wide receiving room, tier 3, but running game, tier 1. So a lot of value in that offense. And the defense still doing some positive stuff. A tier 1 run defense, tier 3 coverage, and I believe that's tier 3 pass rush as well. It's either tier 2 or tier 3. You get the same amount for pass rush. So, that helps out a lot for the Ravens. Their defense hasn't been quite as dominant as it was last year when they were able to get the 1 seed, but still a lot of good stuff here with the Baltimore Ravens. Number 2, kind of hurrying to get to this team because what a surprise. The New Orleans Saints are number 2. Who would have thought? Well, again, what's happening here? How are the 2-2 Saints somehow number 2 on the list with a projected 13.62 wins? Well, first off, Derek Carr has a tier 1 grade right now. Is that going to continue? I don't know. I'm going to guess no. He got off to a really good start in those first 2 weeks, has cooled off a bit. I'm going to expect that he's not going to be an MVP candidate this season, but a good start to the year, which is what allows him to be there. Same thing with the wide receiving room. I'm going to assume those two things do fall back down to earth a little bit, but that might be it. I mean, again, tier 4 offensive line, that's not going to get worse. Run defense, coverage, pass rush, like those things are all solid. Those things should continue to be solid. So, while I could see the offense as a whole fall back down to earth a bit, I don't think this is the second best team in football. I do agree that they're a good team, though. So, that's kind of how I view them. Finally, the 49ers, who are projected for nearly 16.5 wins. So, okay, what's happening here? Tier 1 quarterback play, that helps with Brock Purdy. Tier 1 wide receiver play, tier 2 offensive line, and they still get stuff with the running game, even without Christian McCaffrey. Tier 2 run defense, that might be tier 3 run defense actually, but tier 1 coverage and tier 1 pass rush. So we talk about how important quarterback play, wide receiver play, and coverage is. If you're tier 1 in all 3 of those things, you're going to go places, especially when you're also tier 1 in pass rush and you get a lot of wins with the run defense and offensive line. Do I think this team is going to win 16 games? What, have lost twice already? So no, I don't think that that's going to happen. Kind of a weird situation there where they've even gotten crushed in one of those games, but the Rams game kind of got away from them, and they've had 2 blowout wins on top of it. So, I don't know. Interesting. But yeah, those are the a different kind of power rankings tier list. Again, always a fun exercise, not something meant to be taken too literally, although I know some people still will, but again, hopefully you had fun with this. I had fun making it. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Always love hearing from you, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.